Hey everyone, welcome. Thank you so very much. And Michael, thank you for the introduction. Thank you all for joining me on this cold winter day here in Florida. I know a lot of you are probably up further north from me and probably a lot colder. So I enjoy my nice Florida weather, but thank you all for joining. Today we're going to be going over the top mistakes that are costing your company money. And what I'm going to do is, instead of doing a death by PowerPoint, I'm just going to list out all of the mistakes that I come across all the time. And then I'm going to go through them one by one on Revit. And also, I encourage everyone, if you have a particular question, please make sure to use your questions pane in the GoToWebinar dialog box and ask some questions. So first, and not in any particular order, is my first mistake that I see a lot of times is how people are working with central files. And we're going to talk about how to correctly open, sync, and relinquish those, what to do with a corrupt file in Revit, auditing your project, how and when to do this, how to work with Autocad files, how to duplicate materials and how to use them in Revit, when to use model in place versus creating a family, and what to do after creating that generic family. Next is ignoring warnings. Bad, very bad practice. We'll get into that. Using filled regions versus splitting the face for walls and floors. And lastly, saving your drawing while keeping the complex 3D view open without closing hidden windows. So without further ado, I am going to jump right into Revit. So the very first thing, and by the way, the reason why I came up with all of these items is, as a Revit tech, I get calls all the time and I try to see if there's a trend of things that are being done incorrectly that are causing issues within your office, and I'll explain the reasons why. One of the very first things that always comes up is how to work with a central file. Most of you working in an office are going to be working on a central file and sharing that with others. A lot of times you might want to go through and click on any of these shortcuts that you see up here on my desktop. Now, these shortcuts, what I want everyone to do from now on, moving forward, is ignore them. I want you to pretend that they do not exist. The reason why is, if you're working on a central file, these files right here are old. You never want to open up your old central file, which is what's considered your local copy. Instead, what you want to do is browse by clicking on Open and browse to the directory where you have your central file. By doing this, you ensure that you're creating a new local of the most latest, greatest file that's on the server. For everyone, you want to make sure to always browse to the central file. By default, Create New Local will be on, and we're going to go ahead and click on Open. When we do this, you'll see Revit come up with a dialog box that says, hey, do you want to overwrite the existing file or append? What I typically recommend is every morning I should say, what you want to do is the very first time you open up that project, Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, and Friday, do a append timestamp to existing file name. That way you'll have backup files on your computer should your server ever go south. After the very first time that you synchronize the very first time, afterwards, let's say you go to lunch and you come back, then select Overwrite Existing File. That way you have a date-stamped file, a local file on your server. I'm going to go ahead and select Append. And that's how we simply open up a central file and start working on it. I've had a lot of customers call and say, Rick, but we always open up our local file and then synchronize back to the server. When doing that, you're basically causing a potential issue and a corruption between out-of-synchronized files, out-of-sync file information. And eventually you will get a corrupt file. So that's the skinny on opening a central file. Next is, all right, I've done some work, and let's say I'm going to just come over here and just do something. Oh, don't want to do that. How about we'll add a door, and come on, add a door. There we go. All right, we'll add a door here. Okay, and next is how to properly save your file. Now, when you have this save button, you want to really ignore that when working on a central file. You always want to click on Synchronize. There's a little drop down right over here next to the Synchronize button, and you want to click on Synchronize and Modify Settings. And the reason why is I'll show you in just a moment. Over here, when we open up this dialog box, it'll show us a couple things. One, it'll show us where it's being saved to, which is perfect because we want to make sure that this is going to the server, and most likely it will. Next, right below it, we want to make sure that anything that is currently being borrowed has a check mark next to it. That way, we're relinquishing anything that is currently in our possession so others can use it. Next, which so often is left blank, is the comment section. Now, everyone on the project, when you're synchronizing, if you put in a comment during certain milestones, like for example, received structural plan update, you'll have this information within a log file, and I'll show you exactly where it is. It doesn't take a lot of time to put in this comment, but it is something that'll be a record of the drawing. Then simply click OK. What this does, again, is the proper way of synchronizing that file, again, is first by going to the Synchronize button, then clicking on Synchronize and Modify Settings, and adding the comment. Okay? And you'll see that comment in just a moment. Now, when I'm going to go ahead and close that file and go to the next thing, which is how to send your central file to a consultant. Too often, I'll see consultants or architects or engineers receive drawings from other engineers or architects, and they haven't properly detached that central file. When they receive that central file, you get this dialog box that comes up and it says, hey, the central file has moved. Never, ever send that central file to your consultants or engineers or architects. The proper way of doing this is you want to detach. So we'll select Open, find our central file, and here's the key. Right here, we want to click on Detach from Central. When we do that, that is going to pull it away from our network. Think of it as like a little tree with roots. We're now cutting those roots from the soil and putting it in a little container so that we can then give it to our consultant, engineer, or architect. Over here, I'm going to go ahead and click on Detach and Discard Work Sets. At this point, simply all I have to do is wait until it finishes loading, go to File, and then Save As Project. We're now with a detached, and you'll notice right here it automatically includes detached. So I'm going to delete the name Central and leave detached right there, which indicates that this file is now detached. I'll click on Save, and now when I send this particular file that's detached, it will not be a part of the central file, and then your users or your consultants can use it clearly and easily. Now, next is how to deal with a corrupt file, and we'll take a look at that now. So let's say you're in the middle of working on a project and you have a brownout. In other words, your lights dim for a flicker of a second, and you're doing a synchronization back to the server, and something happens and you have an issue. Here's the proper steps of retrieving a corrupt file. What we want to do is basically start with a blank screen. I would recommend the project manager or the BIM manager take responsibility for retrieving the backup file and ask everyone to close out of Revit and just have one individual do this. What we want to do is go over to the Collaborate tab, look for Restore Backup. When we click on Restore Backup, you're going to browse to the server and find the folder called Backup. This is automatically created every time you create a central file. And we'll go ahead and click on Open. When we do that, you'll get a dialog box that shows all of the backups. And check it out. Here is where all those comments are. Everyone usually leaves blank. Now I have a record of what was done and by whom. At this point, the one individual that's responsible for looking for the file that is not corrupt, what I would recommend doing is, this is the current drawing that you're in, and in this case, this drawing might be corrupt. So I would go to the latest one prior, which is number 13. Select Save As. Save this down to your desktop, and as the project manager, take a look at that file and determine whether or not that file is okay. Now, this is just kind of a saved copy, a local copy that you're looking at. So you want to select Save As and take a look at it. Let's say we select number 13, ooh, bad number, and we click Save As, and we open it up and we still get a corrupt file upon opening. Then we'll go to version 12, do a Save As, and take a look at that. If we determine that number 12, let's say, looks good and 13 is still corrupt, what we can do is basically roll back 12. When we do that, it's going to eliminate and delete the version 13 and the current. So watch here. I'm going to select number 12 and select roll back. And it basically gives us this warning. Hey, are you absolutely sure? Because everything above that is going to be deleted. And I'm going to go ahead and hit yes. And we wait for a moment, and you'll notice that 13 and the current have now disappeared. Now our current file sitting on our server is this backup from yesterday or 2 days ago, okay? So any work done at that point would be lost. My recommendation is at this point, the project manager then makes sure that everyone on each one of your computers deletes your local files. It's critical that you delete those local files because you do not want to have a local file that has still that corruption. So again, it's super critical that you delete the local files on the individual workstations. And after you do that, then go ahead and start to work as you would normally by selecting Open and select the central file and clicking Open. And you are now working with your latest, greatest uncorrupted file. So that's what to do with a corrupted file. Okay, hopefully everyone got that. Next, we want to take a look at auditing. What is auditing? Now, a lot of you probably have come from an AutoCAD background and you know purge and audit, and we'll cover that in just a little bit. And this is an idea where you take your project, and what the project manager should do once a week before everyone comes in is to select audit. When we click on audit, you'll notice over here it says this operation could take a long time depending on the size of your project. It really could. So we're going to go ahead at this point, and what we want to do when we do the audit, we want to make sure that we are the only ones working on the file. We do not want to be creating a local, so I'm going to go through and uncheck new local, then select audit. Now, what this is going to do, it's going to go through and open up that central file. It is super critical that the project manager makes sure that no one else is trying to access the model. Imagine you're a surgeon and you're basically holding the heart of the project in your hands. You want to make sure that no one else is in there with you. You're the main person doing the surgery. So you want to make sure that you're the only one, and you select audit. You do not create local. You open up that audit, run it, and then if there's any issues, you basically address them and then close the file. When you close the file, then you let everyone know they can go ahead and go into the project as they would normally. So that's auditing. Okay. Next is working with Autocad files. Now, Autocad files, most offices are going to work with some type of AutoCAD file in their project because of the fact that that AutoCAD file has so much information and so much junk. We don't want to bring that information into our project. What I'm going to do is go through an example here in AutoCAD and show you the process that I would normally go through in looking at bringing information from my typical AutoCAD project into Revit and the ways to do it and the wrong ways to do it. So in just a moment, while AutoCAD architecture loads, we're going to be taking a look at a sample file in just a moment. So over here, I have a sample AutoCAD file that I'm going to take a look at. And this sample file has some drawings in it. It has some floating information here. It even has a missing XREF. I mean, it is a mess. But in this case, what I typically want to do is I'm going to take a look at, for example, one of these cabinet details. I want to bring this information into my drawing, and I want to show you the correct and incorrect way of doing this. So the first thing I'm going to do is W block one of these drawings out from my CAD file. I'll go ahead and pick a point, and I'm going to select this bottom point right here and select my objects. And what this does is going to W block this out, and I'm going to go ahead and place it over here on my desktop and hit OK. We'll go ahead and take a look at that file, and here it is. First thing I'm going to do is I'm going to move this to 0, 0. As you know, in Revit, the 0, 0 is the origin, and so typically we want to do is have our CAD details, let's say, possibly close to 0, 0 as possible. And since I don't know where 0, 0 is on this, I'm simply going to grab the whole thing and move it from here to 0, 0, 0, and do a zoom extents. And there it is. I'll go ahead and save it. So at this point, I've pretty much done all that I need to do. Now I'm going to go ahead and just minimize this. We'll open up a blank project over here, and I'm going to show you the incorrect way of dealing with an AutoCAD file. In this case, what I'm going to do is create a drafting view and bring in that cabinet detail. When I bring in that cabinet detail, I'm going to create a drafting view to basically bring it in. Over here, I'm going to show you, again, this is the wrong way of doing it. I'm going to go ahead and import that CAD file. And here's my new block. And I'm going to do origin to origin. I'm going to change this to black and white. Okay, zoom extents. And I'm like, this thing is, it's a block. It's an imported symbol. This is the wrong way of doing something within Revit. I want you to notice that when I go over here, for example, to annotate, and I go to, let's say, detail line, you'll notice over here, these are the different lines that are built into Revit. Now, watch what happens if I go through and do what you're never, ever, ever supposed to do, and that is explode. I'm going to go over here and do a partial explode, which gives me the ability to possibly go through and do stuff. I'm going to go ahead and delete the elements, and now I can go through and make changes, and these are individual lines. But what this does, it pollutes the Revit file. If I go back and look at annotate and go back to my detail lines, take a look at this. Watch, when I open up line styles, oh my gosh, I have all of this other stuff in here that is now polluted my drawing. In addition to, when I go to annotation and I start to look at the different types, you'll notice I have now these other styles that are not part of my Revit standard library of information. This is the wrong way of doing it. So for those of you who are looking at this, I'm going to draw a big no. Do not do this. I'm going to show you now the proper way of bringing in a CAD detail. Again, I'm going to start now with an architectural template, and I'm going to show you the right way of working with an AutoCAD detail. Again, what we're going to do is click on View, select Drafting View, Cabinet Detail. I hope I'm not going too fast for everyone. And I'm going to go ahead and hit OK. Now, with this cabinet detail open, I'm going to go back and insert the CAD file. But this time, what I'm going to do is not use the import CAD, but instead use link. And the reason why is when I do that, it basically keeps it in this little envelope of information. I'm never going to explode it, and it's going to stay right here in my drawing. When I look at starting to convert this, and that's the key, is converting the AutoCAD detail to something I can use in Revit. Ultimately, your goal is to get rid of all those AutoCAD details. What we want to do is basically trace over this. But now you're going to say, but Rick, when I trace over that, I'm not going to be able to distinguish between my line work and the line work of the DWG. Simply what we can do is select it, right-click, override graphics by element, and what I'm going to do is create it as a halftone. This is going back to the days of redlining, and when I go ahead and change it to a halftone, now it becomes a halftone where I can clearly see what are my Revit line work versus AutoCAD. Next, I'll go over to annotate and simply start to draw my detail lines. What I'm going to do is start by drawing everything with medium lines, and you'll see how quickly I can do this. I'm going to use the option over here called Pick Lines, and I'm simply going to go through and start to pick the lines. Type in TL, and I'll be able to determine what are the ones that I've converted into Revit lines. Now, you might be wondering, why am I doing this instead of just using the AutoCAD drawing? Anytime you bring in an AutoCAD drawing into Revit, not only does it have the potential of basically making it very dirty with outside elements that are in AutoCAD, it'll also make your project that much heavier. And you'll see I'm kind of, as I'm talking, I'm doing this at the same time, and I'm going through and I'm creating some things. I'll type in trim and kind of select that, and you'll see I'm almost halfway done. At this point, what I can start to do now is start to look at the text. I'm going to show you this great little shortcut that I like to use in creating the text. What I'm going to do is basically bring over this drawing right over here. Sorry, it's kind of scrunched up, and I'm going to bring AutoCAD at the same time and have these side by side. What I'm going to do here in Revit is I'm going to start off, let me just maximize this so we can see the whole thing. I'm going to start off with annotation text at the right scale, 3/32. I'll make sure to give this a filled arrow, and I'll go ahead and start to begin to type something. In this case, I'm just going to type whatever it is and hit. So I have this saved. I'll simply select this and hit copy, multiple, constrain, and I'm going to do one of these for each one of these. Next, I'll go ahead and come back and now bring AutoCAD side by side. In the AutoCAD side, I'll double click one of these, do Control A, Control C, come in here, and Control V, and done. I'll go to the next one in AutoCAD, Control A, Control C, select the next one, Control V, oops, and you get the idea. Over here, what I'm typically going to do is basically go through and copy and paste that information from one drawing to the other. Now I don't have to worry about retyping that information. All I have to do is basically go through and copy paste that information from one to the other. And now when I have my AutoCAD information transferred over, all I have to simply do is select it and unpin it and delete it. And now it's no longer part of my Revit file. This now keeps my Revit project clean, and I don't have to worry about having this yucky AutoCAD stuff bring in and corrupt my Revit project. Cool, huh? So we want to make sure to keep AutoCAD drawings as separate as possible, and ideally creating these drafting views that are transferred information from AutoCAD. So that is how to work with AutoCAD files. Next, let's go through and show you how to work with materials. A lot of times, I'm going to go over here and I'm going to just simply draw something in Revit, and we'll take a look at how materials are used within Revit. I'm going to go over here and simply just draw a wall that's going to the second floor. Okay. And when we start to take a look at materials, I'm going to do consistent colors and manage and materials. Here is our material browser. This comes up as a separate dialog box. And by the way, this material browser is, you can share this with other projects. You can actually transfer those from one project to the next. Over here on the left-hand side, we have our materials. And what I see a lot of times as a mistake of working with materials is I'm going to come over here and, for example, type in wood and see what kind of things I have. And I see I have this cherry wood, and I'm going to create a duplicate of it. When I create a duplicate, I'm showing you the incorrect way of doing this or potential problems with duplicating it. I'm going to come over here and call it my new cherry wood. Sorry for the old caps. And when I go through with my new cherry wood and think I'm going through and making some changes to this, for example, I'm going to go over here to the appearance. I'm going to select basically a different type of image. I don't know what image this is, and I'll change its color. And you'll notice it updates here, and I'm really happy with it. I'm going to go ahead and hit apply. Look what happened up here to our cherry. The other material right here is changing with this. And the reason being is that the material is actually being shared. If we want this to be independent of the one that we just duplicated or cloned, basically you need to click on this button right here. By clicking on this, it gets rid of the one and basically makes this no longer shared. Now, if I come through over here and change my color, for example, and click apply, you'll notice that this stays a different color than this. So the lesson here is when working with materials, if you do duplicate it, make sure to go to the appearance tab and click this so that you have 0. Okay? Now, a better way of creating materials is this. On the bottom over here, we're going to go ahead and select create new material. And in this case, I'm going to go ahead and rename this one to vertical wood paneling. Vertical, or let's say horizontal wood panels. Horizontal wood paneling. Okay, here it is right here. What we're going to do is start to build this information. Now you'll notice over here, it's a generic material. Here's how we're going to go through and basically give it all the material information for wood. By clicking on this button right over here, this opens up the asset browser. The asset browser allows us to basically populate information back into our Revit project. So over here, I'm going to look for wood, and here, for example, is some different wood paneling. I'm going to go ahead and just select this very first one. Let me slide this over and bring this in by populating that information. So I click on that, close it, and now look, my horizontal wood paneling now has all of the information from the asset browser. What's super exciting about this is the rendering material that you're using here is shared with 3D Studio Max. So now I have a unique thing that is just dedicated to this particular project. Over here, I'll go ahead and select, for example, modeling, and select this wood paneling, or maybe this one here. And it's going to be this color. When I go to identity, I'm going to go ahead and give it a description, wood paneling 1. Now, here's another thing that gets people always an issue or tripped up within Revit, is if I type in my information here and click apply, a lot of times, especially in Revit 2016 and 17, for those of you who are using it, this information will not stick. What you want to do is click on the next area to make sure that this basically sticks. Over here, we're going to make sure to change it into wood. And then again, click on the next area for this to basically stick and click apply. That is the correct way of using materials. Now, with those materials, I can go through and start to use them in my project, which brings me to actually another question that was actually later on of using filled regions. I see this as an error. A lot of times in elevations, people want to create a filled region to show different information. So for example, over here, the incorrect way of doing this, I've seen some people create a filled region and they want this to be wood. And it looks great in this one particular elevation, but what you don't realize is that it's just superimposed. When we take a look at this in 3D, that information is not there. So that's the wrong way of doing it. What we want to do is use the materials to basically split that face. So what we do is we select our object and we use split face. This is the correct way of now using the materials that we've created instead of using masking regions. I'll select split face, and in this case, I'll select the wall and give it an area. Let's do something fun that we want to split. Now this is split into two areas. I'll then come in and paint with my material. Here it is, horizontal wood paneling, and I'll simply click to paint it. Click on done. And if I take a look at this in 3D, that information is now always there. How cool is that? What's nice about this material also is if we take a look at it in an elevation, now we can actually bring in even more information and make it smart. By going to annotate, we can do a material tag, and I can basically drop that in. As soon as I place a new material over here above this section, that question mark will go away. A lot of times you can also create, for example, a camera view. If you wanted to see what this looks like in 3D, we can go through and create this default camera view. And again, it's a very good practice to rename these. And I'm going to say view of wall. And I come over here and click consistent colors. If I lock this view, I can basically go through and do the same thing by annotating it. Oops. Try this. 3D view. I'll go ahead and lock the view. I'll call it locked. And at this point, I can select a material tag, and over here with a leader, basically begin to draw in an isometric view. Now, I can use my materials to basically now tag the information smart in any drawing. Very cool. And that is the correct way of using materials instead of filled regions. So really, really exciting about that. Next is we're working with duplicate materials. We've done that. Now, how to work with modeling in place versus a family creation. And I think we got still time. It's 10 minutes after. I think we're going until 1:30, so we still have some time, which is great. Covering a lot of good things. I hope you all are getting a lot out of this. In this case, what we want to look at is in this particular drawing, the question always comes up is when to use a in-place family versus modeling. Now, my rule of thumb is if, let's say, this is something that we're going to be doing as a receptionist desk, then it's one of a kind. It's built in place and fabricated on the site. That might lend itself to being something done as modeled in place. So I'll go ahead and model something in place, and I'll go ahead and give it the correct label. And in here, I can basically go through and create create something quite simple and easy. In this case, I'm just going to do a simple little desk using my sweep pattern. I'll sketch a path, and I want to show you how easy this is to kind of create something that really has a lot of nice features in it as just something that's modeled in place. And I'm going to go ahead and come back all the way here, click on the green check, edit the profile, and take a look at this in a front elevation. At this point, what we're doing is we're going through and creating a three-dimensional object. And I want to show you how easy this is to create something. Let me do a thin line. First, hidden lines, so I can see what we're doing. And I'm going to go 4 inches over and 4 inches up. And let's say 2'6". And up. And down and back over, clicking on the green check and the green check again. Now keep in mind, we are working with a in-place family. The nice thing about this in-place family is now we can use that paint feature, which isn't used often or often enough. I'm going to go over here to paint, and for example, I'm going to select glazing clear and start to go through and paint the surfaces of this to be transparent glass. Bet you didn't know you could do that. And I'll come over here. And then there's our wood paneling again. And we'll do something white down here. And what you're seeing here is a model that basically I can now look at, and it has all the material in it. When I go back over here, for example, to my locked drawing, my locked view over here, I can basically go through and start to move this, and here it is, and it has that information built into it. What's nice about this is the information basically will also carry on through. So if I rename the glass will have that material. As soon as I move that over the glass, it says clear glazing. It's a really quick and dirty, easy way of creating a piece of furniture that is a place in component, in-place component. Now, the thing is, you might be wondering, Rick, all right, I created this in-place component. That's great. But when would I have the need to create a family? When creating a family, it's something that you want to think of as something that is manufactured off-site and can be populated over and over and over again into not only this project, to other projects as well. To do that, we want to basically go through and select New Family. Now, typically, I'll go through and start with a generic family. One of the things that I want to talk about is generic families. When you're starting to create that generic family, you want to make sure, as soon as you finish making it, or at the beginning, is you want to go ahead and give it information. So for example, if I'm making a light fixture, I want to go ahead and assign it to the category of light fixtures. So when it gets brought into my project, it comes in as the right category. In this case, if I go through and create something in this view, I'm going to go ahead and create something that is going to be like a small object here, and out, and 1/4 of an inch. this could be something that could be used from project to project, and so I'm going to make sure that this is given the category of the right object. And I'm going to go ahead and just shortly finish this off. And give it a glass material and click on it. Oh, and axis line. There we go. And if I take a look at that, it is this little object. I'll go ahead and load that into the project, and you'll see in just a moment when we take a look at this, it actually comes in the correct family parameter of a lighting fixture. It's important that you have that correctly labeled and created as such. And I'll go ahead and just put that over on top here. You get the idea. At this point, basically, now we have an object that has been created as an individual family, and the families can be then used from project to project. So that is the difference between modeling in place versus family creation. Next, let's take a look real quick at, let me go ahead and save this in case we need it again. Warnings. Now, warning, what I'm about to show you could ruin your day. No, I'm kidding. Basically over here, when you're looking at a project, in this case, I'm going to go through and open up that central file again and take a look at it. When I work on it, I want to make sure that as I'm working on it, I want to address any of the warnings. Too often, as you're working on a project, you ignore the warnings and imagine those warnings as little dust bunnies. Those dust bunnies in your project eventually start to clutter your project and will become corrupt. The best way to go through and make sure that the warnings have been addressed is to basically to go through and make sure to go and take a look at them. What we want to do is go to the Manage tab and look at Review Warnings. This will bring up a dialog box over here of all the warnings that we have in our project. You want to make sure to open these up and take a look. Sometimes some of these warnings are just warnings and they're not something to be really concerned about. But let me show you, for example, something that could easily be a warning where I'm going to go through and I'm going and adding a bunch of these. I'm adding them one on top of the other, not knowing that I've done something incorrectly. Let me just make sure. And I'm going to select this and move it from here to here. I'm going to ignore that warning, and I'm going to go ahead and synchronize added furniture. Okay. I'm going to go ahead and pretend I just opened up the project and now click on Review Warnings. When I look at the warnings over here, you'll see that there's going to be this particular one that we're looking at is that there's instances that were going to be duplicated. In looking at this in plan view, I might never notice this. Over here, if I click on this object right here and then select Show, it's going to basically take me to that project where I have this issue. I can then go to it and go, wait a minute, I don't see that it's duplicated. Uh-oh, look at that. I'm selecting, I'm moving it. Oh, there's one on top of the other. Now it won't, now I won't have that warning. I'll go ahead and synchronize again and the warnings will go away. So lesson learned here is to make sure to go through and delete or take care of these warnings. So again, as you're working on your project, if you have a warning, it's something that you should address. Okay, so that's warnings. We talked about filled regions. And last but not least is creating a complex view, right? We have a complex view over here and we want to save in this particular view. The problem is a lot of times if you work on your project and you save in this particular view, What you don't realize is that all the other drawings, let's say I have this drawing open and this drawing and this drawing and this drawing. I'm going to go back to my 3D view. I'm going to save my work and synchronize. What happens is that in the background, Revit has to go through and make sure to also save all those other views that are open, which could potentially easily delay the synchronization of this file. The best way to make sure that you synchronize with just one view open is to go ahead and use this handy dandy little button right here called Close Hidden Windows. We'll go ahead and click on Close Hidden Windows, and now if I click on the drop down, there's no other views open. So when I save my file, I'm really expediting the time it takes to synchronize this file back to the server. And in a quite large project, that could be several minutes throughout the day, time saved, okay? And so that is basically some of my top recommendations and issues that I see when working with Revit files. Again, to go down those really quickly, correctly working with a central file. As a recap, you want to make sure to browse to that central file. Never open up the local copy. Then working with a corrupt file, we always want to go through and basically go through and restore the backup. Next is auditing the project, and that's done upon opening. So we want to make sure at least once a week that the project manager is auditing the project. Then we talked about how to work with Autocad files, and that again is to keep them in isolation and never explode them. You always want to bring that information and transfer that line work. Next was materials. Materials can be used to really help your project along, and also a quick and easy way of labeling everything correctly. Make sure to, if you're going to duplicate an object, duplicate it, but then make sure to go to the Appearance tab and click this handy dandy little button, or create new materials. Next, we talked about in-place families versus creating something, then ignore warnings, and also using complex views and saving those views. And that pretty much wraps it up. I'm going to leave the last 5 minutes or so for questions. So hopefully we have some questions on the call.
Yes, Rick, we do. Several people would like to know, why would you use the Detach from Central versus the Etransmit feature?
Oh, that is a great question. So the Etransmit feature is something that originally was created in beta, and you want to make sure that if it does, you want to make sure that it detaches that file. So Etransmit is a wonderful feature that came out as an add-on, but you want to make sure before transmitting and sending that information to your consultant, open it up on your own and see if the Synchronize button is highlighted. If it's highlighted, that means it's creating a, it's still looking at it as a central file. So just make sure to check your settings on Etransmit, but one way around it is just to do a simple detach. Great question.
Next question, can you describe again why you want to discard the work sets when sharing a detached model?
Okay, so there's two frame of minds here, two thoughts of detaching and discarding the work sets or preserving them. If you preserve the work sets, it's so that the next person using the project can basically use those work sets. As an architect, for example, when I receive my drawing from an engineer, I don't need to have their work sets. I just want to basically be able to bring all of their drawings. Let's say they're the mechanical engineer. I'm going to create a work set on my own and activate that work set and call it mechanical, and then bring in their detached file into my work set of mechanical, so as not to confuse it or make it overly complex. I'm dumping their work sets. You want to keep work sets if it's something that you're going to continue to work on that project with someone else.
Okay, the next question, how do you recommend coordinating civil AutoCAD drawings with Revit architectural and structural filings with footings, basement, walls, etc. I created a topo surface from the Autocad within a separate civil Revit file with the linked in Autocad, and then place building pads as needed and publish coordinates out to the architectural Revit file.
Okay, that's a really good question. And unfortunately, what I don't have enough time because it's about a 10-minute little exercise. But what I will do is I'll publish a how-to do that, because that's a great question. And there's a lot of steps involved in that. But what I'd like you to do is I'm going to send out, there's actually, if you open up your web browser and just Google Rick Kremer screencast, that's Rick Kremer space screencast. Autodesk has this incredible knowledge base where instead of going to YouTube, you can basically go through and find information on how to do something. I place these screencasts up here on their website, and it's free for everyone. And I basically put a couple of these up a week on how to do something. What I'll do is later on today, I'll create a short video on that coordination between architecture and civil, and you'll see it right over here. In this case, this is one that I did yesterday on just how to export civil 3D drawings into Revit, but not the coordination aspect. So I'll create another video, but this is a great location for finding how to, not only from myself, but from other contributors as well.
All right. Next is, did you say that when opening a Revit model for the first time each day to select append timestamp instead of overwrite local copy?
Right. So the very first time that you open up that file, Monday morning, let's pretend it's Monday morning today. I'm going to go ahead and select append timestamp to existing file name the very first time I open up that file, and that will create a backup on my own computer. Now, remember how we went through and created and restored a backup from the server. Let's say our server, God forbid, got hit by lightning and there's no backups on the server. At that point, you can go and look at, let's say, the 5 of us that are working on a project and see who has the most recent backup file, and everyone's files will have a timestamp associated with them. So the very first thing in the morning, again, as a recap, open this up and do append. The next time that you close the file and you go away from your desk and you come back and you open it, then click on overwrite. That way you only have one file per day on your computer that is date stamped.
Okay, and we have time for one more question, and the last one is the method the same for model delivery when you have multiple linked projects in your project? Do you need to detach all of the linked models as well?
Absolutely, absolutely. What you want to do is basically, because when you have a project and you link your projects in, those projects are going to look for the directory, let's say on your P drive, P for projects. You give it to the next person and it's not in the same directory. They have to go through and basically find those locations. So to prevent that error from popping up, what I recommend is opening up your architecture file. Let's say I'm the architect, I have MEP and structure, and those are separate linked files. As the architect, I want to basically unload those files and then separately send those out as detached files. When, as the architect, I'm going to basically hopefully be receiving detached files from my engineers. The only central file will be mine. So I only have to detach my model and then send the rest of them over together.